Welcome to the Old Fashioned Masonic Podcast, where we talk all things Freemasons while drinking an old fashioned. I'm Brian.
And I'm Russ.
Russ, we've got this big old product placement here that we're not getting paid for, but we're going to talk about Colonel Sanders. So before we talk about Colonel Sanders, when's the last time you've had a bucket of KFC?
A couple minutes ago in your house, but prior to that, a bucket, probably it's been 5 years, maybe?
It's probably been more than that, because my wife, when she was pregnant, her craving was Kentucky Fried Chicken, mashed potatoes, and gravy. Nothing else would do. So it's been at least 25 years that I've ever been to a KFC. I didn't even know if they still made the bucket, but I will tell you the bucket feels smaller. That's shrinkflation. So I won't get into that because we try not to get political. So forgive me, since we had chicken, drinking a little bit of a Coors Light, not a spot.
So why is it that we are talking about chicken?
Well, why are we talking about chicken? Because we're going to talk about Colonel Harland Sanders. And just like we do on any old-fashioned Masonic podcast, we like to know about the man as much as we do the Masons. So I'm going to talk a little bit of, we're going to volley back and forth on Colonel Sanders. So Harland Sanders, his road to success was super long. He had a bunch of various jobs, not only throughout the country, but just throughout his life. And he struggled back and forth for kind of his recipe for success. Despite his challenges, he stayed true to what he knew, and he never failed, never had this fear of failure like most of us do, and eventually persevered to establish a food chain that was so finger-licking good. You see what I did there? It became iconic. So I will tell you, Russ, before we did the episode, he's like, Kentucky Fried Chicken, now that's the finger-licking good. Yeah, it's like, I'm not going to say what I said, but it's like it couldn't have been this brand. So anyway, so I don't want to get my card pulled.
All right, so we're going to start out a little bit, tell you a little bit about him. So he was born September 9th, 1890, near Henryville, Indiana. He was the oldest of three children.
Yep.
His father worked on an 80-acre farm until he broke his leg in a fall. Then turned to work in a butcher shop there near town. And
his dad died later after that.
Then he lost his dad, and Harlan was only 6.
So think about this. Back then, so this would have been 1896.
Yeah.
A broken leg, you die.
Yeah.
So that's rough. So after his dad died, Harlan's job was to kind of take care of the family. One of his many responsibilities include to handle much of the cooking. So later he began working at as a farmhand on the ranch at the age of 10. First of his many jobs. Think about that. I mean, listen, we grew up in a farming community and we'd do stuff at 10, but there was no way I was a farmhand at 10.
No, I was not at 10.
No way.
No. So when he dropped out after the 7th grade because he needed to go to work to help support the family, and so he was dropped off near on a nearby farm. At 13, he left home and moved to Indianapolis. And now he became a painter and was doing horse carriages. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it is, because it's one of the many things that he did. So a little bit later, he falsified his birth certificate so he could join the Army. So he joined the Army at 15. So he falsified his birth certificate to join. I would think now in today's age, we've got some softies out there that if they were 21, they'd probably falsified their birth certificate to be 15, so they wouldn't have to go. So anyway, so he served in Cuba. He was honorably discharged at 16. So at 16, he moved to Alabama and he began his next kind of series of jobs.
Some of the things I was reading about, he even got basically almost like a campaign medal for the occupation of Cuba.
Yeah,
it was one of his...
Yeah, you got your AIT medals or anything like
exactly
anybody that served. It's your obligatory medals.
Yeah. So anyway, he then worked for the Southern Railroad as a blacksmith, as a helper. During that time, he moved to Alabama, where he got married
right.
to Josephine King. They had 3 children. They then moved to Jacksonville, Tennessee, where Harland studied law at night.
So think about this. This is a kid died at 6. Her dad died at 6. He became a farmhand. He went in the military at 15. He gets out at 16. He's doing that and the other, and he decides, you know what? I'll just go to law school. Now, without the research, I had no freaking idea. Again, very impressive. So after Harlan finished law school, he moved to Little Rock. He spent 3 years practicing law until it came to an untimely end. So this is kind of a story about Harlan. Harlan was a feisty dude. He liked to get down when somebody didn't when they didn't agree. He just liked to scrap it up a little bit. So why did his law degree come to the untimely end? He got in a courtroom brawl with his client.
With his own client.
And heaven forbid that tarnished his reputation. So obviously that was a low point of his life, but he's like, well, screw it. I've got 3 kids. I've got to drive on. I've been working since I was 6. So he wanted to kind of improve his life. So fast forward, now he's 26.
Yeah. So
this guy has lived a life of a 100-year-old already.
So this is now 1916, and so he secures a job selling life insurance for Prudential Life Insurance Company.
Yeah.
Then in 1920, he starts a ferry boat company.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, that's what I would do.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Creating this job provided to be the formative moment in his entrepreneurial career.
Right. So this business kind of took off. So he ended up selling his stock at that time for about $22,000, which is $300,000 today, right? He took that money, moved to Kentucky, he became a salesman for Michelin Tire. Think about all the stuff this dude has done already. He's a hustler, though. We love hustlers here. So he's in Kentucky. He's working for Michelin. Things got a little squirrely. So then he met the general manager of Standard Oil. Standard Oil was a big, the Rockefellers at the time. It was he met the GM of Standard Oil in Kentucky who asked him, said, hey, you want to run a service station for me? He's like, yeah, screw it. Let's do it. This is what I do. I mean, I was a ferry captain. I can run a gas station.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a transition.
So during the Great Depression, the Shell Oil Company offered Sanders a service station in North Corbin, Kentucky. Yep. And that's where he sort of started his professional career in the food service.
Right.
From his station in North Corbin, he started to kick out chicken dishes and others, like chicken fried steak, whatnot, steaks, regional dishes. At first, it was a limited space and funds, but he then started to grow that business. And
serving the food in his living room. He had such a small space, and he's like, you know what? My stuff is so good. Come to my house and I'll feed you. So fast forward, people love this stuff, right? It was just interesting. So now let's talk about some more controversy with Harlan.
This guy was sort of a hard-headed dude.
He was a scrapper.
He was scrappy.
Nothing's ever mentioned about a little boozing, but something, when I get a little more scrappy, I get a little bit of extra love in me. So a little beer goggles. Okay. So famously or infamously, Sanders was involved in a shootout with Matt Stewart. He was a local competitor. Why? Because, at the end of the day, he painted over Stewart's sign, his business sign, to promote his chicken business. So ultimately, Stewart was sentenced to prison.
Well, there was actually one of his employees who was shot and killed.
Oh, so one of Sanders was?
Yes.
And I didn't know that.
And so he went to prison for murder.
Oh, okay. Wasn't just... Nice color there. So Sanders baited him. His employees sacrificed. So in heaven, he's eating chicken fried steak and KFC right now in the holy bucket above. So Sanders, he's like, well, now my competition is really out of here. So he began just cooking and visiting areas just for the food, right?
Yeah. And so he expanded his operation in nearby motel in the restaurant capacity. It seated about 142 people or so.
That's a lot, though.
That's a lot. And
Yeah.
by 1936, he's now 46 years of age.
Right.
Becomes more famous, earning a commission as a Kentucky colonel.
So, do you know we have a Mason in our lodge that's a Kentucky colonel? Did you know that?
I did not.
John McConnell. Fun fact. So, John will be on soon.
Yeah, so a Kentucky colonel, basically the governor.
The governor.
Of,
he does.
Of, Kentucky.
Based on donations or different things that you do. So, I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to be a Kentucky colonel. I don't know how you do it, and I can write a check as much as the rest guy. So,
Well,
I'd like to be Colonel Brian Bird.
Well, go to Kentucky and do something good.
Stay tuned, folks. So, after he was commissioned as Colonel Sanders, that changed his profile. Back in the day, that was a pretty big deal. And so folks started coming around to his restaurants there. But eventually, his restaurant at the motel caught fire and it was destroyed. So I don't know if that was under nefarious conditions or not. So
yeah. So undeterred, he was.
He's 50 now.
He is now 50 and officially found his calling. Sanders acquired a motel in Asheville, North Carolina, and perfected that now famous secret recipe,
Which is patented.
Yep. And basically using a pressure cooker to fry that chicken.
Fascinating, isn't it? So I never knew it was under pressure. I thought pressure would make stuff a little more moist, but it shows what I know. That's the extent of my culinary skills, right?
Okay.
So he had another obstacle, obviously. So World War II hit now. It's December 41. The United States, now they're in war, and the ration on gas was issued. So he was forced to close his motel. Why? Because, the gas is what he used to cook with. So, but ultimately, let's fast forward a bit just to KFC.
Okay.
What you know. So, obviously, Colonel Sanders is best known for founding this fast food chain, Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC, and for becoming the face and symbol of the brand. Frankly, I don't know that KFC would have taken off without him being the brand. When I see Colonel Sanders, I think KFC. When I think KFC, I think of Colonel Sanders. Is that fair?
I think so.
Is that fair? He's he just became, he's still a hustler. So he's in his 50s. So he's selling this fried chicken by the roadside. During the Great Depression, he expands it out to several different food chains and other restaurants into 150 countries. But for those that watched the Dave Thomas episode, they'll know this. Part of Sanders' hustle is he was taking this chicken business into different restaurants around just to kind of pimp the brand. So if you think of a convenience store, you'll see Hunt Brothers Pizza or this, that, and the other. So he was doing these mini franchises. So he worked with Dave Thomas. Dave Thomas grew the business, ended up selling the shares back, and then Dave Thomas went and founded Wendy's. But Harland Sanders,
So
he's a hustler.
He sort of made that fried chicken actually a fast food item.
He did.
Prior to that, hamburgers were sort of the thing. So why is it that we are talking about him today?
So,
basically,
as you would know, because as much as we like to know about the man, now let's talk about the Mason. So, Colonel Harland Sanders was a Mason. He was raised in Lodge number 651 in Henryville, Indiana in 1919. He was, 29 years old. Not only that lodge, he belonged to several other lodges, and he had just many years of service. He was a philanthropist, just really committed to the Masonic core values. Before his death, he established a Colonel Harland Sanders charitable organization. So he ended up part of that organization. He put a wing at the Masaga Hospital for Women and Children that bears his name, the Colonel Harland Sanders Family Center, and that's in honor of his very substantial donation. The Colonel's Foundation, again, it's helped McMaster's Hospital for Children, the IWK Health Center, the Stollery Children's Hospital, and
a lot of things in Canada.
A lot of stuff in Canada, and it just continued to support. I think there's another $500,000 that was donated as recently as 2016.
Yeah. So at the age of 90, the Colonel passed to the Celestial Lodge above from leukemia.
Yeah. Is that blood?
Yeah.
I think it's blood.
Yeah. So until his death in 1980, he traveled 250,000 miles a year visiting his KFC.
We travel a lot.
Yeah, and that's
250 is crazy.
Yeah,
we travel a lot.
The most I've ever for business was 60,000.
Oh, I bet you've done more than 60, right?
No, 60 in 1 year.
Really?
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, I've done about 150. I think is my max.
Yeah,
and I felt just like blown up.
That's too much.
Yeah.
So anyway, he traveled around, checking his franchises, his businesses,
dressed in his garb.
Yeah, that's the last 2 decades. He didn't ever publicly appear without wearing that.
Right. So today, obviously, KFC is such a popular franchise. It was the first one that really competed with hamburgers back in the day. Yeah. Fast food was just burgers. So when Sanders passed away, the KFC empire had grown to about 6,000 outlets in 48 countries, generating about $2 billion then, which is about $6.6 billion today of annual sales. Today, the secret blend of the 11 herbs and spices is a closely guarded secret. So, but those that are Freemasons, as when we become a Master Mason, everyone that's a Master Mason already knows, we actually get the secret to KFC. We get the closely guarded secret, so everyone knows that. So the conspiracy is gone.
Yeah. Hopefully you've enjoyed our little bit on the Colonel.
Right. So let's turn it over to our friends at Weird History.
Married to his childhood girlfriend, Josephine, by the age of 18. That might seem a little young to you now, but Sanders had old for more than a decade at that point. He'd essentially been an adult since he was 6, so he probably assumed he was ready for the big leap. Within a year, Josephine gave birth to the couple's first daughter. Despite his grandfatherly image of the proprietor of a family-friendly chicken empire, Sanders had a not-so-good habit of beating the feathers out of people. As a young man, he loved to fight, and his quarrelsome nature got him fired from several jobs. He lost his railroad firefighting job after getting into a fracas with an engineer beneath a water tower. Another time, he was dismissed at a Justice of the Peace Court after attempting to beat his own client with a chair. And reportedly, Sanders once punched a man in a barber's chair so hard that the shaving lather flew right off the man's face. Josephine, understandably, grew annoyed with Sanders' chronic inability to hold a job longer than it took to smack someone in the head. So she left him and went to her parents' house, taking their daughter with her. Sanders was a colorful southern kicker used to getting his own way, so he wasn't about to take that lying down. He deep-fried a plan to kidnap his own daughter away from his estranged wife, although the exact details of the incident are a bit sketchy. In his autobiography, Sanders mentioned he was planning to kidnap multiple children, despite the fact that the couple only had one child at the time. Was he confused about how many kids were available to kidnap, or was he remembering a different kidnapping? How many kidnappings did you plan, Colonel Sanders? Luckily, Sanders' criminal plots weren't as meticulous as his business acumen. His entire kidnapping plan was to lurk in the bushes outside of Josephine's parents' house and wait for his daughter to come within snatching distance and sop them up like a biscuit does gravy. It's unclear whether his aging knees started aching from hiding in the bushes or if he just got sick of waiting. But he eventually gave up his plan and simply walked inside the house, first to talk to Josephine's father and then to Josephine herself. The couple eventually reconciled and brought the family back together. After losing more jobs than a party planner, Colonel Sanders finally settled down as the owner and manager of a gas station in Kentucky in 1930, when he was 40 years old. He couldn't know it at the time, but this was the first step towards what would become a wildly successful career, and officially the longest single job he would ever hold. In order to satisfy hungry gas station customers, Sanders began serving meals of chicken and other delicious meats. When the chicken became a hit, he added a full cafe to the station and hired a woman named Claudia Price to run it. Claudia just so happened to also be the Colonel's mistress, a fact he made no attempt to hide from his wife Josephine, who finally divorced him and left him for good in 1947. Apparently, there is a limit to how many fistfights, affairs, and attempted kidnappings a person is willing to tolerate. After splitting from his first wife, Sanders married Price in 1949 and stayed with her until his death. Sanders' pit stop was located on a particularly rough stretch of the Dixie Highway in Corbin, Kentucky, called Hell's Half Acre. This being the Deep South during Prohibition, it was a place where booze and shotguns lived. Come to think of it, booze and guns have pretty much always been kindred spirits. In the Colonel's own words, bootleggins, fights, and shootings was as regular as a rooster's crowing in the morning. Crime and violence were commonplace, but fuel was always in demand, and Sanders' motor stop was well positioned to earn him a comfortable living. Also, he was not exactly a stranger to thuggery. Sanders once got into a shootout with a rival gas station owner named Matt Stewart. The conflict began when Stewart started painting over Sanders' highway signs. And if there is one thing you absolutely do not do, it is to with the Colonel's money. With some executives from Shell Oil in tow, Sanders went to confront Stewart. The confrontation quickly became a gunfight. One of the Shell executives was killed, but Sanders wounded Stewart badly enough that the man gave up and was arrested for murder. While the incident was tragic and probably not the way Sanders had intended things to go down, taking Stewart out of the picture gave him a monopoly on gasoline sales in the area. On another occasion, Sanders was awakened early in the morning by the sound of gunfire outside his business. Two rival bootleggers were engaged in a shootout, entirely too close to the Colonel's gas station. Clad in nothing but his underwear and clutching his own standard-issue Kentucky scattergun, he kicked open his door and shouted, "Line up, both of you sons of bitches, and throw down your guns." We don't know if Sanders forgot to put his clothes on, but doing that in your skivvies, that's a power move anybody will respect. The two men complied, and a still pantsless Sanders helped the sheriff escort them to jail. Even after finally settling into his role as a gas station manager, Sanders still filled his off hours with odd jobs and volunteer work. Either he was captured by the wanderlust spirit, or he was trying to make sure his biographers had as much material as possible. And we appreciate that, Colonel. One of his many side hustles was volunteering as the local midwife in Corbin, Kentucky. He traveled across the county delivering babies like an armed stork, ultimately helping to bring 8 new lives into the world. It was this work, along with his famous fried chicken, that earned him the title of Kentucky Colonel, the highest civilian honor the state can bestow. The honor was given to him by Kentucky Governor Ruby LaFoon, who sounds like a character in a Kentucky Fried Chicken universe, or KFCU if we're being Marvel about it. Sanders made it his personal mission to be one of the most eclectic and unique figures in modern American history. It's like he was collecting future bar trivia questions about himself. He managed to be tangentially involved in the most significant research projects ever conducted. Fuel rationing during World War II forced Sanders to pick up a few more side gigs, which he was already more than accustomed to doing. One of those supplemental jobs involved him serving as the assistant manager of a few cafeterias located within a research facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where materials were being developed for Project Manhattan. Yeah, Colonel Sanders' finger-licking fingerprints on the project that created nuclear weapons. The research site where he managed a few eateries was tasked with producing uranium-235, a vital component in Little Boy, the bomb that was ultimately dropped on the city of Hiroshima in the first atomic attack in history. Bit of a dubious distinction, but even doomsday architects have to eat.
Colonel Sanders, did your chicken make you a wealthy man?
See, I started franchising when I was 66 years old. Now that's an advantage again. Don't quit because you're 65, because you can do something quite worthwhile after that.
The popular version of the story of the founding of Kentucky Fried Chicken involves Colonel Sanders contemplating suicide after retiring at 65, and instead deciding to take a chance on building a fast food empire. And although that charming tale of a senior citizen weighing the pros and cons of offing himself is the story KFC itself likes to promote, it's probably a myth. There's no evidence Sanders ever considered ending his own life, or that he ever really retired. The man collected jobs like signatures for a student council election. He didn't even quit after becoming a millionaire. More on that in a bit. However, the true story of KFC's founding is just as interesting. Sanders did not stop working when he hit his 60s, but he was forced to change careers yet again after the construction of the interstate highway system effectively killed business at his rural highway gas station. Between the loss of his primary source of income and the meager sum of his Social Security checks, the Colonel was strapped for cash. Sanders reached out to Pete Harmon, a restaurateur he'd once met at a convention, and pitched him a restaurant franchise based on Sanders' personal fried chicken recipe that had proven so popular at his cafe. To sell Harmon on the idea, he took his potential investor with him to the grocery store to buy ingredients, and then fried up some chicken with 11 herbs and spices right in Harmon's kitchen. The meal was evidently enough to convince Harmon, who briefly tried to convince Sanders to sell him the recipe before finally agreeing to franchise the first Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant in Salt Lake City in 1952. Surprisingly, Sanders had nothing to do with the name. Kentucky Fried Chicken was reportedly coined by a painter named Don Anderson, whom Harmon had hired to paint a sign for the restaurant. Solid pick, Don. With Pete Harmon already on the hook, Sanders began to travel around the country looking for more franchisees. He loaded his car full of chicken, flour, pressure cookers, oil, and 11 different herbs and spices, offering to cook batches of chicken in exchange for a nickel for each order sold. He slept on the road to save money and time, and we get the feeling that Sanders was a guy who was comfortable sleeping in his car. Sanders more or less stayed on the road for the next 12 years, building his empire by recruiting more and more franchisees. By 1964, KFC had over 600 franchises across the country. That same year, he sold his interest in KFC to some investors for $2 million when he was 73. According to Sanders, the amount was paid in cash, in 3 glass-covered carts, totaling the $2 million. They had 31 FBI and Treasury Department guards watching over that pile. Even though he no longer had any ownership stake in the business, Sanders continued to make public appearances acting as the face and mascot of KFC, visiting KFC restaurants around the world as a spokesman. When KFC was acquired by Hublin Inc. in 1971, the fast food chain had over 3,500 franchises and company-owned locations across the globe.
Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Hublin paid $285 million for the empire Sanders built.
I see in the paper yesterday the same company that I sold for $2 million sold for $240 million yesterday.
You feel you got left out?
I'm left out. That's right. I don't want nobody to write me for any money because I didn't get any of that.
Sanders began to sour on KFC after the Hublin acquisition, and he engaged the company in several legal disputes. He tried to sue them for misusing his image. Hublin countersued for libel, but both cases ultimately fizzled. Sanders also attempted to open a brand new fried chicken franchise using his image, which he technically no longer owned as far as the food service industry was concerned, but he eventually backed down. I guess after he realized he couldn't bait Hublin executives into a gunfight. But that didn't stop him from publicly denouncing KFC. He complained that the changes the company had made to his gravy recipe reduced it to a damn slop. Sanders was witnessed walking into a KFC franchise as late as 1979, a year before his death, to throw food on the ground and berate the manager for what he perceived to be subpar quality. Maybe not surprising for a guy who plotted to abduct his own child. Colonel Sanders died on December 16, 1980 in Louisville, Kentucky at the age of 90. He saw the end of the 19th century as the dirt-poor son of a single mother, working to support his siblings, and nearly saw the end of the 20th century as a millionaire restaurateur and one of the most famous faces on the planet. Not a bad run, Colonel.